Welcome to the History AI podcast, where the past comes alive with facts, anecdotes, and a dash of humor. Here are your hosts, Chuck and Marco.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the History AI podcast. I'm Chuck.
And I'm Marco. Today, we're diving into a fascinating yet often overlooked rebellion, Vue Pa Chay's Revolt, often referred to as the War of the Insane. But before we get into the nitty-gritty, let's set the stage with what was happening in the world at that time.
Great idea, Marco. So, let's rewind to the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The world was witnessing rapid changes. The Industrial Revolution had already transformed many societies, and European colonial powers were expanding their empires.
That's right. In Southeast Asia, specifically in the region now known as Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, the French were solidifying their control over Indochina. This brings us to our main story, the Hmong people's resistance, led by Vue Pa Chay, against French colonial rule.
This revolt is a classic example of the struggles between indigenous populations and colonial powers. So, let's dive into what led to this conflict.
The Hmong people had lived in the mountainous regions of Indochina for centuries. Their society was characterized by a strong sense of community, autonomy, and a rich cultural heritage. The Hmong practiced subsistence farming, and their remote location allowed them to maintain their traditional way of life largely undisturbed.
However, the arrival of the French in the late 19th century changed everything. The French colonial administration sought to exploit the natural resources of Indochina and to integrate the region into the global economy. This led to a series of policies that deeply affected the Hmong people.
One of the most significant changes was the imposition of heavy taxes. The French introduced a head tax and a land tax, which were burdensome for the Hmong, who had previously lived without such financial pressures. The taxes were often collected brutally, with French officials and local collaborators using force and intimidation.
In addition to the economic strain, the French also implemented forced labor policies. The Hmong were compelled to work on infrastructure projects, such as roads and bridges, which were designed to benefit the colonial economy. This forced labor was often carried out under harsh conditions, leading to widespread suffering and resentment.
Religious persecution further fueled the discontent. The Hmong had their own spiritual practices and beliefs, which were sometimes at odds with the Catholicism promoted by the French missionaries. The colonial authorities often attempted to suppress traditional Hmong religious practices, which was seen as an attack on their cultural identity.
Land confiscation was another major issue. The French and their collaborators seized fertile lands from the Hmong, redistributing them to lowland settlers and European planters. This displacement disrupted the Hmong's agricultural practices and threatened their survival.
It was in this context of exploitation and oppression that Vue Pa Chay emerged as a leader. Born in the late 19th century, Vue Pa Chay was not just a shaman and spiritual leader but also a charismatic figure who could unite his people. He claimed to have received divine visions, which played a crucial role in mobilizing the Hmong resistance.
Vue Pa Chay's visions spoke of liberation from French rule and a return to the traditional ways of life. These prophecies resonated deeply with the Hmong, who saw him as a savior and a symbol of hope. His ability to blend spiritual guidance with practical leadership made him a powerful figure.
By 1918, the stage was set for a major uprising. The cumulative effects of taxation, forced labor, religious persecution, and land confiscation had pushed the Hmong to their breaking point. Vue Pa Chay's call to arms was not just about fighting the French, it was about reclaiming their dignity, autonomy, and cultural identity.
The revolt that followed was a testament to the Hmong's resilience and determination. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, they used their knowledge of the rugged terrain to wage a formidable guerrilla war against the French. Vue Pa Chay's leadership and the unity of the Hmong people were critical factors in the early successes of the revolt.
It's fascinating how a combination of spiritual belief, cultural pride, and sheer determination can drive a people to resist a seemingly unbeatable force. This prelude sets the stage for understanding the full scope and impact of Vue Pa Chay's revolt. The primary objective of Vue Pa Chay's revolt was straightforward but profound: to expel the French colonial forces and regain autonomy for the Hmong people. This wasn't just about political freedom, it was about preserving their cultural identity, their way of life, and their ancestral lands.
The French, on the other hand, had their own set of objectives. They aimed to maintain control over their colony in Indochina, which was a significant part of their global empire. The region was rich in resources and strategically important for trade routes and military presence in Southeast Asia. Losing control would have been a major blow to French colonial ambitions.
The sides involved in this conflict were diverse and complex. On one side, you had the Hmong resistance, composed of various tribes united under the charismatic leadership of Vue Pa Chay. They were primarily farmers and villagers with deep knowledge of the mountainous terrain, which they used to their advantage in guerrilla warfare.
Vue Pa Chay himself was a remarkable figure. As a shaman, he claimed to receive divine visions that guided his actions and inspired his followers. His leadership was a blend of spiritual guidance and military strategy, making him a unique and powerful leader. He was able to rally thousands of Hmong to his cause, creating a formidable force despite their lack of formal military training.
On the other side were the French colonial forces. These included French soldiers, colonial troops from other parts of the French Empire, and local collaborators who were often from lowland communities or other ethnic groups. The French had superior firepower, better logistical support, and formal military training, but they were unfamiliar with the harsh and rugged terrain of the Hmong regions.
The French military strategy was heavily influenced by their experiences in other colonies. They relied on their superior numbers and advanced weaponry, including artillery and firearms, to suppress the rebellion. However, the Hmong's guerrilla tactics, which included ambush hit-and-run attacks and disrupting supply lines, made the conflict much more difficult than the French had anticipated.
Now, about the name the War of the Insane, this term has a rather derogatory origin. The French colonial authorities, not fully understanding the cultural and spiritual motivations behind the revolt, labeled the Hmong resistance as irrational and fanatical. They viewed Vue Pa Chay's claims of divine visions and his followers' fierce loyalty as signs of madness.
The French propaganda portrayed the Hmong fighters as insane to justify their brutal suppression tactics and to downplay the legitimacy of the revolt. They used this term to paint the Hmong resistance as a disorderly and chaotic uprising led by a delusional leader, rather than a legitimate struggle for freedom and justice.
Despite this, the Hmong themselves saw Vue Pa Chay's visions as a source of strength and inspiration. They believed they were fighting a holy war, guided by divine intervention. This stark contrast in perspectives highlights the deep cultural misunderstandings and the colonial mindset that sought to undermine indigenous resistance movements.
The term the War of the Insane is thus a reflection of the colonial attitude towards the revolt. It dismisses the Hmong's legitimate grievances and the profound spiritual and cultural motivations that drove them to fight. Understanding this context helps us appreciate the resilience and determination of the Hmong people, who were willing to risk everything for their freedom.
The determination of the Hmong, under Vue Pa Chay's inspired leadership, set the stage for a conflict that would leave a lasting legacy in the region.
The legacy of Vue Pa Chay's revolt is profound, serving as a symbol of resistance and a reminder of the complexities and challenges faced by indigenous populations under colonial rule.
Understanding the tactics and the detailed timeline of Vue Pa Chay's revolt provides a clearer picture of the strategic and psychological elements that made this resistance movement so impactful. The conflict, which spanned from 1918 to 1921, was marked by a series of tactical maneuvers and key events that showcased the ingenuity and resilience of the Hmong fighters.
The revolt officially began in 1918, following years of mounting tension due to French colonial policies. The initial phase of the rebellion was characterized by small-scale skirmishes and hit-and-run attacks. The Hmong, under Vue Pa Chay's leadership, avoided direct confrontations with the better-armed and more numerous French forces. Instead, they focused on guerrilla tactics, leveraging their deep knowledge of the mountainous terrain.
One of the first major engagements was the Battle of Phu Nong. This battle took place in a narrow mountain pass where Vue Pa Chay had strategically positioned his fighters. The Hmong fighters used the element of surprise to their advantage, launching a sudden and fierce attack on a French patrol. The ambush was devastatingly effective, resulting in significant French casualties and bolstering the morale of the Hmong forces.
Following their victory at Phu Nong, the Hmong continued to employ guerrilla tactics. They would often conduct night raids on French outposts, disappearing back into the dense forests and rugged mountains before the French could mount a counterattack. These tactics not only inflicted losses on the French but also created a sense of insecurity and unpredictability among the colonial troops.
In 1919, the Hmong launched a daring siege on the French outpost at Tham Ta. This siege showcased their ability to conduct prolonged operations. The Hmong surrounded the outpost, cutting off supply lines and communication. For weeks, the French troops inside the outpost were under constant pressure from intermittent attacks. The French eventually had to mount a significant relief effort, diverting resources and troops from other areas, which weakened their overall strategic position.
Throughout 1919 and 1920, the Hmong continued to target French supply lines. They focused on disrupting the logistical support that was crucial for the French military operations. Ambush on supply caravans, destruction of bridges, and blocking of mountain passes were common tactics. These actions forced the French to commit more troops to protect their supply routes, spreading their forces thinner and making them more vulnerable to further attacks.
One of the most notable raids during this period occurred in early 1920 when Hmong fighters, led by young Shua Mua, attacked a major French supply depot. The raid was a masterpiece of guerrilla warfare. Under the cover of darkness, the Hmong infiltrated the depot, setting fires and causing explosions that destroyed a significant portion of the French supplies. This attack severely hampered the French's operational capabilities and demonstrated the effectiveness of Hmong tactics.
By 1921, the French had adapted their strategies in response to the Hmong resistance. They began to use heavier artillery and launched large-scale offensives aimed at rooting out Hmong strongholds. The French also employed scorched earth tactics, burning villages and crops to deprive the Hmong of resources and force them into submission. This ruthless approach caused widespread suffering among the Hmong civilian population.
Despite these harsh measures, the Hmong continued to resist. Vue Pa Chay's leadership during this time was critical. He maintained the unity and resolve of his fighters, even as the situation grew increasingly dire. His ability to inspire his followers through his visions and his strategic acumen kept the resistance alive against overwhelming odds.
The turning point came in late 1921 when the French launched a decisive offensive to capture Vue Pa Chay. This campaign was marked by intense and brutal fighting. The French, now familiar with the Hmong guerrilla tactics, used their superior firepower to devastating effect. They concentrated their efforts on isolating Vue Pa Chay from his followers and breaking the Hmong's will to fight.
Vue Pa Chay was eventually captured in December 1921. His capture and subsequent execution were a significant blow to the Hmong resistance. Without their charismatic leader, the organized resistance quickly crumbled. However, the impact of the revolt continued to resonate long after the fighting had ended.
The timeline of Vue Pa Chay's revolt, from its inception in 1918 to its brutal conclusion in 1921, highlights the determination and strategic ingenuity of the Hmong fighters. Despite facing a vastly superior enemy, they managed to sustain a prolonged resistance, inflicting significant casualties and creating substantial challenges for the French colonial forces.
The tactics used by the Hmong, particularly their guerrilla warfare strategies, had a lasting impact on the way indigenous resistance movements were perceived and conducted. The revolt demonstrated that even a seemingly insurmountable colonial power could be challenged effectively through unconventional warfare.
As we reflect on this period, it becomes clear that the Hmong resistance under Vue Pa Chay was not just a military struggle but a profound expression of the desire for autonomy and cultural preservation. The revolt's legacy continues to inspire and teach valuable lessons about resilience, leadership, and the enduring quest for freedom.
The leadership of Vue Pa Chay was a cornerstone of the Hmong resistance. His role as a shaman and spiritual leader imbued the revolt with a sense of divine purpose. Vue Pa Chay's visions, which he claimed were messages from the spirits, provided a powerful source of inspiration and hope for his followers. These visions often predicted victories and guided strategic decisions, reinforcing his authority and the morale of his troops.
One of the most compelling stories of Vue Pa Chay's leadership occurred during the early days of the revolt. According to legend, Vue Pa Chay had a vision of a great battle where the Hmong would defeat the French despite being outnumbered. This vision led to the Battle of Phao Nong. The Hmong fighters, driven by their belief in Vue Pa Chay's divine guidance, executed a perfect ambush, inflicting heavy casualties on the French and securing a significant victory.
Another heroic figure in the revolt was young Shua Mua, a fearless warrior whose tactical brilliance and bravery became legendary among the Hmong. Young Shua Mua led several successful raids against French positions, often using daring and innovative strategies. One notable raid involved attacking a French supply caravan at night, using the cover of darkness and the element of surprise to capture vital supplies and ammunition.
Yang Shuamua's leadership was not just about battlefield tactics, he also played a crucial role in maintaining the morale and cohesion of the Hmong fighters. His ability to inspire and motivate his troops was essential in sustaining the resistance, especially during the harshest periods of the revolt.
Another unsung hero was Li Xiong, a female leader who organized and led a group of Hmong women in supporting the resistance. Li Xiong and her group took on essential roles such as gathering intelligence, providing medical care to wounded fighters, and ensuring the supply lines within the Hmong territory remained operational. Her leadership demonstrated the vital role that women played in the resistance, often working behind the scenes but making significant contributions to the cause.
Li Xiong's network of informants and scouts provided crucial information about French movements and plans, allowing the Hmong fighters to anticipate and counteract French strategies. Her efforts in organizing medical care were equally important, as they ensured that injured fighters could recover and return to the battlefield.
Vue Pa Chay's leadership extended beyond the battlefield. He was a unifying figure for the various Hmong tribes, which traditionally had their own leaders and internal conflicts. His ability to bring these groups together under a common cause was a remarkable achievement. This unity was essential in mounting a coordinated resistance against the French, as it pooled the resources and manpower of the diverse Hmong communities.
One of the most poignant stories from the revolt involves Vue Pa Chay's final days. As the French intensified their efforts to capture him, Vue Pa Chay continued to lead his people with unwavering determination. Even as the situation grew dire, he refused to surrender. His capture and subsequent execution were seen as martyrdom by his followers, solidifying his status as a legendary figure in Hmong history.
The legacy of Vue Pa Chay's leadership and the heroism of figures like young Shua Mua and Li Xiong live on in Hmong culture and history. Their stories are passed down through generations, serving as a source of pride and inspiration. The resistance they led was not just a military struggle but a fight for the survival of their cultural identity and way of life.
These heroic stories also highlight the resilience and ingenuity of the Hmong people. Despite facing overwhelming odds and the might of the French colonial forces, they fought with a tenacity and courage that left a lasting impact on the region's history.
As we reflect on these stories, it's clear that the revolt was more than a series of battles. It was a profound expression of the Hmong's desire for autonomy, dignity, and the preservation of their cultural heritage. Vue Pa Chay and his fellow leaders exemplified the spirit of resistance and the power of unity in the face of oppression. The toll of Vue Pa Chay's revolt was immense, both in terms of human lives and broader societal impacts. The conflict resulted in significant casualties on both sides, leaving a deep scar on the Hmong community and the French colonial forces alike.
Estimates of the casualties vary, but it is believed that thousands of Hmong fighters and civilians lost their lives during the revolt. The French, with their superior military technology and larger numbers, were able to inflict heavy losses on the Hmong forces. However, the Hmong's guerrilla tactics also led to substantial French casualties, with many soldiers killed by ambush and raids.
The Hmong fighters, often outgunned and outnumbered, showed remarkable resilience and bravery. They fought fiercely to protect their land and way of life, even when faced with overwhelming odds. The French, on the other hand, found themselves in a protracted and costly conflict. The difficult terrain and the Hmong's hit-and-run tactics made it hard for the French to achieve a decisive victory.
Beyond the immediate loss of life, the revolt had profound impacts on the Hmong society. Many villages were destroyed during the French military campaigns, leading to widespread displacement. Families were torn apart, and the social fabric of the Hmong community was severely disrupted. The French scorched earth tactics, which included burning crops in villages, were particularly devastating, leading to famine and suffering among the civilian population.
The execution of Vue Pa Chay in 1921 marked the end of organized resistance, but the spirit of the revolt endured. Vue Pa Chay's death was a significant blow to the Hmong, but it also cemented his status as a martyr and a symbol of resistance. His legacy continued to inspire the Hmong people long after the revolt had ended.
The impact of the revolt extended beyond the Hmong community. It forced the French colonial administration to reassess their policies in Indochina. The high cost of the conflict, both in terms of financial resources and human lives, highlighted the challenges of maintaining control over such a diverse and resistant population. The revolt underscored the limits of colonial power and the resilience of indigenous resistance movements.
In response to the revolt, the French implemented several policy changes. They attempted to placate the Hmong by reducing some of the more oppressive taxes and labor demands. The French also sought to integrate the Hmong more fully into the colonial administration, hoping that greater inclusion would reduce the likelihood of future uprisings.
However, these measures were often too little, too late. The Hmong's mistrust of the French had deepened during the conflict, and many continued to harbor resentment towards the colonial authorities. The legacy of Vue Pa Chay's revolt served as a reminder of the Hmong's desire for autonomy and their willingness to fight for it.
The revolt also had a lasting cultural impact. The stories of bravery and sacrifice became integral parts of Hmong oral history. Songs, poems, and stories about the revolt were passed down through generations, ensuring that the memory of Vue Pa Chay and the resistance remained alive. These cultural expressions helped to preserve the Hmong identity and reinforce their sense of unity and pride.
For the French, the revolt was a stark reminder of the challenges of colonial rule. It exposed the vulnerabilities of their control and the potential for resistance among indigenous populations. This realization influenced French colonial policy not only in Indochina but also in other parts of their empire.
In the broader context of Southeast Asian history, Vue Pa Chay's revolt was part of a larger pattern of resistance against colonial rule. It foreshadowed the growing movements for independence that would sweep through the region in the following decades. The Hmong resistance, though ultimately suppressed, contributed to the eventual decline of French colonial power in Indochina.
The legacy of Vue Pa Chay's revolt is a testament to the enduring spirit of resistance and the fight for self-determination. It reminds us of the importance of understanding and respecting the cultural and historical contexts of indigenous peoples. The impact of the revolt continues to be felt in the Hmong community and serves as an inspiration for those who seek justice and freedom.
As we wrap up, we reflect on the profound sacrifices made by the Hmong during this period and the lasting impact of their struggle. The story of Vue Pa Chay and his followers is a powerful chapter in the history of resistance against oppression, one that continues to resonate today.
Before we go, we want to give a special thank you to our listeners. Your support means the world to us.
Absolutely. If you enjoyed today's episode, please rate, subscribe, and share the podcast. A 5-star review helps us reach more people and continue to grow.
And don't forget, you can suggest topics for future episodes through our social media channels. We love hearing from you.
Also, exciting news, we now have merchandise available. Check out the link in the show notes to grab your History AI podcast gear.
And remember, every episode of the History AI podcast is evergreen, so you can come back and listen anytime.
Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on the History AI podcast.
Discover the dark, enchanting world of shadowed journeys, the tales of Jordan and Squishy. Follow Jordan, a seemingly innocent girl with a hidden power, and her loyal companion Squishy, who reincarnates into different animals after each battle. Venture into the ominous depths of the Whispering Woods as they face fierce creatures and uncover ancient secrets. Will Jordan succumb to the darkness within, or will she find the strength to forge a new destiny? Perfect for fans of dark fantasy and epic quests, this spellbinding tale will captivate and leave you pondering the fine line between hero and villain. Dive into Shadowed Journeys today. Available on Amazon now.